Zeke Miller is political reporter for Time, and he joins me now from Washington. Okay, Zeke, James Clapper reaching out to Donald Trump last night. What was the purpose of that conversation? And was it, as Mr. Trump says, to denounce that there was even a file?
You know, certainly there's an element of that. We saw that sort of very rare public statement from the Director of National Intelligence saying, essentially apologizing that that all of this had sort of come out there. James Clapper is not staying on in the new administration. President-elect Trump has tapped Senator Dan Coats for that job pending confirmation. But for him, it's sort of the credibility of the intelligence community is on the line. Donald Trump yesterday turned his press conference, at least the beginning of it, into sort of an indictment of the intelligence community and something he had done over the last several months over intelligence regarding the Russia hacks as well. Finally, Donald Trump came around to accepting that Russia was behind the DNC and the John Podesta email account hacks. But you know, he was still impeaching their credibility in public. So James Clapper, on behalf of the broader intelligence community, had to try to sort of, for the good of the intelligence community, try to settle some of those differences. And it remains to be seen whether or not that will actually last.
What do you think is behind Mr. Trump's distrust and his vocal, you know, almost disdain for the intelligence community? He's been very aggressive about siding with Russia when it pits against the intelligence community.
You know, it's not so much disdain as much as it's a valuable political tool for him. Skepticism. These are classified intelligence briefings. The public doesn't have access to them, and often they go against some of his policy priorities. For the president-elect, you know, raising doubts about things that are presented in that leak out from private intelligence meetings, gives him the upper hand. It sort of shifts the conversation back in his direction, number one. But number two, allows him to, if he sows doubts publicly about Russia's interference or the like, he can sort of spin things back towards creating trying to maintain the ability to cut a deal later with Russia on all of the other priorities that he's talked about publicly, whether it be Syria, trade, sort of getting tougher on China, things that he can make, and also resetting the relationship between the U.S. and Russia. He needs, right now, President Obama certainly has been the bad cop on that front. Donald Trump has certainly been a very good cop. If he were to certainly change his tune overnight, things would get a lot more difficult for him in terms of carrying those out. So I think that's where some of these public statements come from. And certainly it comes from not serving in government, not being a regular consumer of these intelligence reports, not working with these people over the course of decades, and in some cases of folks on the Hill.
You know, repeatedly, Zeke, so many people have underestimated Donald Trump, from securing the Republican nomination to making it to the White House. Do you think people are underestimating his ability to turn the relationship with Russia into something that might help the U.S.?
Russia will never be helpful. I think you'll hear that we've heard that from some of the nominees throughout their confirmation hearings over the last couple of days, that they don't think Russia will be helpful. But I think the president-elect, and he's talked about this a little bit publicly, he sees avenues for cooperation and needs to maintain at least the sort of publicly, outwardly, this sense of being praiseworthy or collegial with Russia in order to make that happen. It's a fine line, and certainly it puts him in a very difficult bind with members of his own party who are sort of more hawkish in terms of how they deal with Russia. And it's also sort of a more realpolitik sort of position from him, in which he's, you know, not willing to condemn human rights or civil rights or war crimes abuses that Russia has carried out in Aleppo and domestically and abroad. So that puts him at a tough spot with many in his own party, but it maintains the option potentially for getting something done. But we won't really know until he takes office.
You know, Zeke, yesterday during the press conference, Trump did acknowledge that Russia was probably responsible for the DNC hack, but he actually came short of condemning Russia and Vladimir Putin. Why wouldn't Trump take that step, and what do you think might be stopping him at this point?
I think it's again to that same point, the notion of that he wants to reset that relationship with Vladimir Putin. He doesn't, or at least right now, maybe that will change with time. He doesn't want to walk into office sort of with this antagonistic relationship with the Russian leader. So maybe he'll change his tune, but certainly. That's one element of it. The other element to that is he still views any criticism or mention of the Russia hacking in the election as somehow undermining the legitimacy of his election victory. And there's, you know, three different issues there. But for the president-elect, any question of whether or not Russia was behind it, even separated from did it or did it not help Donald Trump win on November 8th. for him, it still undermines his credibility. So that's why he's very, he's loath to talk about it. And yesterday he talked about it in maybe 4 or 5 words.
Well, Trump said that he would ask his newly named intelligence official to submit a report about the hacking within 90 days. Do we know anything more about that report?
We don't really. I mean, he said he's going to task Coates and Pompeo, the designate to lead the CIA, to lead that. And he also announced this morning that he's going to bring in Rudy Giuliani. He's spent the last 15 or 16 years doing security consulting as an attorney and sort of in the private sector, and will be a sort of a special consultant to him personally, setting up meetings with the private sector, which is, besides raising ethical issues in terms of Rudy Giuliani, who can profit off some of these arrangements and brokering some of these meetings, given his access to the president-elect. But it does sort of, we still haven't seen the process by which who's going to prepare this report, when they want to see it, the questions they want answered, how much of it will be forward-looking, how much of it will be sort of a post-mortem. On what we've already seen a post-mortem for the intelligence committee. It's not clear he's going to see so much new. Maybe when his own people are in there, he'll get a slightly different outcome. But far more likely, I think we'll see is sort of something more of a roadmap for cybersecurity going forward. That seems to be, he doesn't really want to relitigate 2016 in that regard.
Zeke Miller with Time. Thank you, Zeke.
Thanks for having me.